So sucks. Just a minute. So queued up here. How you doing? All right. So I'm going to try this video. I'm going to try doing this video with the phone so that you can see both at the same time. See how that goes. But I don't know if I want to do that first or the other thing first. Let's see. I think we should watch the video first. Well, not much to say about this Nashville thing except that let me turn that music off, sorry. Not much to say about this Nashville thing except for that it's wrapped up in a neat little bow, isn't it? It's all over with, right? Just some poor, lonely 63-year-old guy that gave not one but two houses away to a single mom in LA that he supposedly never met, and was just feeling depressed and decided to drive his bomb-filled camper downtown. Sit there for 6 hours or so, the last hour and a half of which he played a recording with gunshots, which they still haven't confirmed, but they're going to get there eventually once somebody actually asks. Played a recording with gunshots and a warning for everybody to get away, and he just decided he was going to blow himself up. I mean, if you don't believe me, you can look at the news and what they've talked about with the neighbors of his now that they've spoken to. Said he was just a quiet guy, of course, that they barely talked to him ever. And the one guy, one of the mainstream sources had one guy who said, oh, and he told me he was going to do something to make himself in Nashville famous, but I didn't think nothing of it. You know, and then the other neighbors going, oh yeah, just a quiet guy, never noticed nothing. He has no history with the police. They said that they had no active cases on him. He wasn't any kind of person of interest. So he owned an electronics store, like I speculated, and they're calling him a communications expert, whatever exactly that means. But that doesn't really matter because apparently he was in the camper. See, when I was talking before about how strange that message was, one of the things that I said was at the tech level. To make a message like that, time it out, have it change what it's saying, that requires a little bit of tech skill. But I mean, if the guy is sitting in there and he's made a recording and all he has to do is press play on different tracks digitally, not nearly as hard to do. So is that why we didn't get any video footage of him getting out of the vehicle? Because he never got out of the vehicle. So none of the other footage shows any pictures of him sitting in the driver's seat while the thing was parked there for 6 hours. So apparently he just went into the back, sat next to his bomb, and played with his PA system to try to manipulate the police to come down there to start doing evacs of all the people. Apparently this is what this guy did, right? And by the way, he gave away his house to somebody he never met. And apparently now he's giving away other possessions of his, even though we don't know what these possessions are. Some of his neighbors said, yeah, he gave us some stuff or tried to, man, this fucking stinks so bad. I mean, if he went through all this trouble, why didn't he stream it? You know, they still haven't produced a manifesto or anything from his house. Why didn't he stream himself doing it? Especially if he's a communications expert. Why not? Nope. And he's got that weird ass name that does happen to fit in with a non-Q. It is kind of suspicious. But, you know, nothing to see here. 2 days. This is all wrapped up. Oh, yeah. It's we ID'd him from some DNA because he does. It turns out he does have a relative or two. Now, the story with why he gave his house away to this girl initially was he didn't have any relatives. Now he's got relatives. He's got a mother, apparently, who's still living. He's 63. So, you know, she's in her 80s or 90s. And she's cooperating with authorities. Just a nice, neat little fucking bow. So, anyways, I want to talk about this. So this is an excerpt from a larger video. We'll see how this looks when I hold it up. I'm going to try to hold this thing up. It's about 5 minutes long. So we're going to watch this and then talk about it.
In a suburb of Moscow. He was the son of a high-ranking Soviet Army officer. He was educated in the elite schools inside the Soviet Union and became an expert in Indian culture and Indian languages. He had an outstanding career with Novosti, which was and still is, I should say, the press arm or the press agency of the Soviet Union. It turns out that this is also a front for the KGB. He escaped to the West in 1970 after becoming totally disgusted with the Soviet system, and he did this at great risk to his life. He certainly is one of the world's outstanding experts on the subject of Soviet propaganda and disinformation and active measures. Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation. What matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized. This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in the United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist.
Yep, that's just about the end of it. Okay, so let me get that right. Yeah, close enough. Why did I show that? Why is that important? And what does it have to do with Nashville? Well, really, it's all part of it. You know, there's more to Nashville, too. For example, nobody wants to talk about the servers that were there. One major news network did say something about, well, AT&T's there, and the AT&T building may have been the target. But then we got another story that apparently this 63-year-old guy who wasn't known to police and liked to give his house away to single women across the country, his daddy worked for AT&T. That's the explanation. My daddy worked for AT&T, and I don't like them. That's what they're peddling. So nothing to see here in Nashville. They're just trying to wrap that shit up with a neat little bow. So that interview that we just watched was from 1984. Okay, so that was he was KGB, but his official title was a propagandist, right? And this guy in 1984 is talking about how to infiltrate a nation, how to make communism be able to take over in a nation, right? And it's interesting to me, too. He's 1984. Reagan's about to be reelected for his second term. And Reagan's victory that time around was very large. He was one of the record win margins in history for a vote. I also remember that somebody this year's summer was floating around some of Reagan's anti-communist speeches from the 1960s, back right after he was done being an actor, when he was a senator or governor or something like that, whatever he was before. So Reagan, as a president, had a history of being against communism and liking to talk about the communist threat, right? And here's this guy talking about the 4 stages of infiltrating a country to try to change over their political system, right? Demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. Well, demoralization, he says, takes 20 to 30 years, can be longer. And his point of view in 1984 was that they were already almost at the end of a first generation, but the most important thing that he talked about there was you infiltrate the education system. And you get teachers, professors, left-leaning, and they become, he likes to use the term useful idiot. I've used the term willful idiot a lot, but he says he likes to get that they like to get the useful idiots who are pro-communism but don't really understand communism in these positions of influence where they start to teach people, yeah, your country's really a piece of shit and your country's bad. Well, this stuff started back in the 60s. And that's not really a surprise to me. It's probably not a surprise to a lot of people, but it's also kind of, for us who aren't that old, and I'm still pretty old, it's kind of tiring hearing about fucking shit from way back then when we can't really substantiate it when we right now in the last 5 to 10 years, and especially in the last 6 to 7 months, have seen evidence of this over and over and over again. Well, we see these large crowds of people going out with the BLM or Antifa, and a lot of them are white suburban kids, just for example. It's like, well, what the fuck is so terrible about their lives that they're out there? Are they all just that big into justice? And do they all really personally feel, or that so many other people are treated so badly? Have they had these experiences, especially some of them at 17, 18, 19, 20 years old? Have they seen so many injustices in their life that they just feel they have to be out there? Well, that's not it. It's what they've been getting taught in schools. And that is part of what he is talking about, demoralization. Now, at the time that he did this interview, and at the time he defected to the United States in 1970, Russia was still the Soviet Union, and they were still a communist. But in studying this, I found out that Russia and China have always had some issues with each other. They were never communists on the same page. They had some different views of which direction communism was to go. There's a lot we could talk about with communist Russia, and I don't want to get off on a rabbit hole about that. I mean, we could talk about communist Russia in relation to World War II, because, initially Hitler and Stalin were buddies. Hitler and Stalin were the original allies in the beginning of World War II, before it started and in the beginning of the war. And there was a point at which, after Hitler cut his brown shirts because they were too socialist, and Hitler didn't like the way that Stalin treated his own people because he was a fucking communist, that he broke away from them. And then the USSR ends up allying with the United States and England, the allies, right, et cetera, et cetera. So fast forwarding to when this guy is talking in 1984, he's already saying, sorry, just reading the comments. He's saying that at that point, he's already seeing a lot of subversion in the schools. Well, subversion in the schools has become a popular topic because it's so bad right now that if you even say subversion in the schools, or you're against teaching critical race theory, or you're against the rewriting of history, or you're against the taking down of statues just because the statue may be of a person who owned slaves, founding fathers, that kind of shit, you can't even say that you don't agree with that without somebody taking a big shit on you. So there's been a soft demoralization by these useful idiots, as he calls them. But man, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, that has accelerated exponentially. I'd have to wonder, where the hell did it come from? A lot of people are like, oh, it started with Obama. No, I don't buy that. I mean, if anything, I'd buy it started with September 11th. But this guy says, and I would believe, no, it started way back before that in the 60s with these radicals that would infiltrate popular colleges. I'm prone to believing that. Well, the next step of this 4-step system to fuck up a country is destabilization. That's something that you do over the course of, I think he said, like 2 to 5 years. Well, there's been plenty of destabilization since 2001. The September 11th terrorist attacks were a huge thing. You could look at certain things in Obama's administration, especially after the first 2 years that he did, that were destabilizing, the economic crash. You could also look at Trump's entire presidency, because since the end of 2015, the media has been on the warpath trying to do everything to call Trump the worst thing for this country, the white supremacist, the fucking blah, 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 right? Everything that they've said, calling anybody who supports him a deplorable, and every other nasty name that they can come up with. So the destabilization has been going on for 4 years. And depending how you look at it, you could say it's been almost going on for 20 years, right? Either way, though, it has certainly been active destabilization from the media for at least 4 years. Now, this guy's full interview in this session that he sat down with that guy is like an hour and 15 minutes long. I've got it posted on my BitChute. I'll put a link to it in the description after this is done. But he talks a lot about also other facets and ways that they would control governments and spread propaganda. One of the things that he touches on, which is quite, I'd like to say pleasing to hear because it makes me feel right, but it's not really. It's actually terrible. One of the things he talks about is so many of these people who are out there, especially the people who are pro-communist but don't know anything about communism, and especially the people who are the racial justice people. I forgot what phrase he used because he didn't call them social justice warriors or PC or woke or whatever, because this was obviously 30 years ago. But the same groupings of people. And he goes, the funniest thing is that when power comes and it changes, these people don't realize what happened because they think that they're going to be in control and they're going to have influence. And basically, he says, they're cast aside because they are useful idiots. Now they go do work or they die. They have no power. They find out that all the stuff that they thought they were fighting for, this racial justice shit, doesn't even exist. Never was going to exist. It has nothing to do with justice. It has to do with everybody being treated the same. Yes, everybody is same piece of shit. He doesn't say it exactly like that, and pardon my bad Russian imitation, but he says basically everybody's treated like dirt. Everybody's treated terrible. So yes, we are all equal now. You're all equal slaves to the state. And he says it's so funny. He said for him personally, it's funny watching these useful idiots who are tools, who are pawns for the bigger machine, pushing this agenda. Well, the third stage of this is crisis, right? Just as he described crisis, and I can't remember what he say, 1 to 6 weeks or up to 2 months, something like that, but a short period of time, crisis. Well, you could say that we were in crisis starting with COVID. You could say that we were in crisis starting with George Floyd and then all the protests. You could say that we were in crisis starting with a week or two before the election and definitely post-election with all the accounts of the F word that I can't say or they'll pull my video. Or we could be in crisis the entire time. His system isn't exact. This is just the way he describes it. Well, yeah, we are definitely, indisputably, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, we are in crisis. But the worst part worse, if you want to call it worse, stage 4, he says, is that's normalization. He says that, and in his longer version, he says, we had in whatever country it was, they're at war, and at one point, Soviet tank goes in. Now there's no more fighting because there's a tank and there's military, and the people are told, now you are back to normal. And he says, normalization can last an indefinite period of time. It can be a few months, it can be 50 years. But that's how they do it. And when I think I saw this a long time ago. I might have saw it when it first came out when I was like a little kid. But when I saw this again the other day, it had been a while since I'd seen this. Like I said, I didn't really remember it. When I saw this again the other day, listening to this guy talk, it hit me in so many levels. And then I watched the full interview that this guy did and just listened to all the styles and methods of propaganda. The parallel to today, I mean, I was almost going to make a video where I took a sentence that he said, then cut away to another video with a current event from the last 6 to 8 months. And I was looking at this video project. I'm like, I'm going to end up it's going to be in like an hour long, and it's going to take a ton of editing. And I'm not really that good at editing, which you probably know if you watch enough of my videos. But if you can't figure out everything he says and exactly how it's laying out in real time, and he says the other thing that he says is very important is that when it gets to a point when a country's been demoralized enough, especially when they're in the destabilization period, you can take a person to proof. You can explain to them black is black and white is white and offer irrefutable proof, but yet they still won't believe it. I mean, is that Twitter? Is that like the mainstream media? I mean, he couldn't have hit this shit any more on the head. And, I was going to talk about how I feel about Russia, and I suppose it's not really important, but Russia's not a communist country anymore. And when they were communist, there were some differences with China, but with China's brand of communism. But no matter how you look at it, this indefinite normalization is coming once Biden is in the White House. We're going to find out. I mean, there may be a couple of levels. The first level, catching up. Yes, sorry. The first level of that might not be full communism, but it is going to be an expanse of socialism. And the first thing I think that's obvious to anybody, okay, so for people like you who have seen this video already, whatever, right? So you get it. People who haven't seen this video already, pretty fascinating, right? And when you think about how even 10 years ago, but especially 20 or more years ago, if you were to say something like, I think socialism might be a good idea, maybe, or I think communism isn't really that bad, or I think socialism might be worth giving a try, there's really, nobody would take you serious. You might as well pull out your fucking dick and dance in the middle of the street. You're going to look like you're fucking crazy. People go, all right. You know, I might not like it the way it is, but don't start talking like that. Like, we've always had it enough in our heads that even the people who would push for this, they couldn't get an audience. But nowadays, right now, this week, I'm sure we can look on Twitter and find plenty of people that'll talk about how socialism is the answer. And even if we're not talking about communism, but even if we were talking about communism, is it really that bad? Is it really that big? Maybe, capitalism is bad, blah, blah. They don't say it from, I mean, they do say it obviously from behind a computer or phone somewhere on a keyboard, like fucking jerk off, but there are plenty of people that say that in public. I mean, they're not scared to say that. That's a problem. Have we gotten like this? The process of demoralization. And, there's absolutely no way that China has had this much influence in this country for the last 50 years. China's influence is newer, last 10 to 20 years. So perhaps when Russia was still the Soviet Union, perhaps some of the demoralization plans that they put into effect weren't thorough enough, didn't take us all the way over the edge, but got a good seed for that started. And then when the Chinese started this pet project of let's see how bad we can fuck up the USA, what matters, 90, 95, 2002, whatever little thing that they did, especially in conjunction with groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, that they don't even have to ask to help them, but they still do stuff to add to the demoralization and destabilization. They just pushed it further, and look at what they have managed to do to us. I think a lot of the reason that the Soviet Union didn't have more success really had a lot to do with Reagan. I'm not a huge Reagan fan, but I do get why people like him. And like I said, as a president, meh. But when you look backward to some of the speeches he made in the 60s, I mean, some of his anti-communist speeches were just the epitome of eloquence. Well written, good stuff. Anybody want to say anything before I go into a speech about how much I hate communism? No. But I mean, if you look at, okay, how about this? If you look at single events on a more micro level, as each event has to do the same thing that a country overthrow has to. So each event has to have its own period of demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. Let's look at the Nashville bomber and how that worked on that same scale, in that same spectrum, right? The demoralization has been in effect since the beginning of, say, COVID, right? You've already got American people who are prone to being depressed, using drugs, and for what it's worth, having more time on their hands, willing to even listen to conspiracy shit or more extreme stuff, left or right side, just because they have more time and because they're getting sick of living like this. One of the biggest problems with living like this, with the COVID shutdown and having kids not in schools in lots of areas, and having an area like where I live in, where everybody's wearing a mask all the time. There's even signs on my building on the door. Put your mask on in the lobby. You got to have your mask on in common areas. Are you fucking kidding me? But whatever, right? Especially when you're in an area like that, people are already more prone to, if depressed isn't the right word, how about this? Why do you wake up every day, right? I mean, like, obviously part of the reason I would do it, simple answer, got kids. love my kids, not just going to blow my brains out even when I feel like it, not just going to give up, not work, not go get groceries, etc. But aside from the obvious pull for people to survive just because survival is ingrained in us, or to take care of our children just because that's ingrained in us, what other reasons do you have for going to work every day and living? And all that's just because life has negative experiences, but it also has a lot of positive experiences, right? Or you can make positive experiences with good choices, sometimes little luck, right? But the more and more that we have these kinds of restrictions on the way that we can walk around, the way we have to dress, the way that we are allowed to interact with people, because depending on where you're at, where I'm at, this is the kind of area where if you were walking down the sidewalk and somebody else is coming this way, some people will actually go like this to go around you, even when you're wearing a mask, because they are so fucking obsessed with this idea of 6+ feet away from people. But that lack of human contact is not how humans are supposed to be. We're not supposed to be without interaction, without contact. So in order to generate these positive experiences in life, whether you're single or married, because obviously part of being single would be, well, I want to meet somebody that I can, whether it's I want to sleep with or meet somebody I can actually be with and date or marry or whatever. Part of the human experience is meeting people like that. And even though we often tend to have groups of friends that we've had since we were in grade school, maybe some of us we've met in the last 5 years, met from work, whatever, we do try to, when we find people are like-minded, add on to our social circle. When somebody's cool, we're like, yeah, you should come hang out with us, or come over, we should do some stuff together. People like to do that kind of shit because that is part of the human experience. That's the kind of shit that we like. So the more that we have these COVID restrictions, the more that the government is sticking their hand in there saying, deny part of what comes fucking natural to you and everybody else. It's dangerous and it's demoralizing. So it's like an accelerant to that demoralization. We've got demoralization. We have the destabilization when we see the notice that the bomb went off. We have the crisis afterward when we try and figure out, well, what happened. Is this a person who's part of a network, and are there going to be a bunch more bombings? The same paranoia that they pushed with September 11th, like, this group of terrorists got these planes. Are there going to be more of these people? Is this going to keep, right? Crisis, crisis, crisis. And then with this one, that normalization just came right away, earlier today or late last night, whenever it was, where they put up this picture of this Anthony Quinn Warner, 63-year-old, single, white guy, no family, gave his house away. He was just depressed and wanted to drive somewhere like downtown Nashville on fucking Christmas Day because it's dramatic. And he thought it out enough to where he gave away his house and even supposedly told one of his neighbors, I'm going to make Nashville and myself famous. I don't know, man. When I've been depressed. I've been at the end of that fucking gun and knife thinking to myself, fuck. Not 1,000 times, but there've been a couple times it's gotten close. And I'll tell you, when you get like that, the last thing you do is talk to people about it, which is part of the reason why suicide hotlines are such a ludicrous idea to me, because people who are truly that depressed aren't going to call anybody. But that's what we're supposed to believe, right? This dude was just depressed, wanted to go out with a bang, but he was so altruistic, he gave away his house. He was so considerate of others and worried about other people getting hurt, even though he was hurt bad enough to take his own life in this dramatic way, that he built a fucking bomb and drove downtown. I mean, let me tell you about suicide, all right? Because, and my own depression time periods in my life aside, I have had several friends who have killed themselves. And the conversation around that is always the same with the other friends, whether it's at the funeral or whether it's on Facebook or whether it's privately. It's always the same shit. It's like, man, I thought something was wrong. Or, man, I didn't know anything was wrong. I wish she would have called. She would have called me. I wish. It's always like that. But, dude, it doesn't work that way when you're depressed. I also firmly believe that a lot of people that kill themselves, a lot of people, they're just having a bad day. Yeah, they're depressed. Yeah, they're prone to doing it anyways. But in the actual moment, when they swallow too many pills, jump off a fucking building, even drive their car into something, but especially when they blow their brains out or cut their wrists, especially when they do something dramatic like that, I firmly believe that a lot of those people in that moment are at that feeling where shit ain't going to change. And as much as the depression in their life may have been consistent up to that point, there are always highs and lows. And that some of these people, had you just interrupted them or stopped them for a minute right before they're about to do it, 10, 15 minutes later, they might not have felt like it. Why do I say that? Because if I'm going to kill myself, I don't get a gun, put the bullet in the gun, and then stare at the gun for weeks and weeks, positive that I'm going to do it on a certain fucking day. This guy would have needed to decide that he wanted to do it, get all of the stuff to build his bomb, think out all this other shit, and then, as if that isn't incredible enough, on the day he's going to do it, he had to drive down there, and they say he arrived at 1:30. The bomb went off between 6:30 and 7, right? His recording started playing at, let's say, 5 o'clock. So he drove down there for 3.5 hours, sat in the back of his RV staring at his weapon, his mass destruction weapon, his whatever kind of bomb, right? Assuming it wasn't an energy weapon, right? Staring at his bomb. Then he starts playing all this shit, including the song, right? Downtown, downtown, that fucking song. Plus his recording of, if you can hear this, you need to evacuate the area. This whole time, he's going to kill himself. He's positive he's going to kill. I'm just saying, when you are in that fucking gray moment, black moment, when you are ready to pull the trigger, things can snap you out of it. And you mean to tell me that this guy prepped for weeks and weeks, and then in the last day when he did it, 6-7 hours of basically saying, okay, I'm going to do it at exactly this time. That's not how it works. You do it at the time in which you feel the most emotionally overwhelmed. What if he had started feeling emotionally overwhelmed at 3 o'clock? Oh, I would do it right now, but geez, it's only 3, and I haven't started playing my tape of gunfire and shit to get the police down here to get people out of here, so I guess I'll just have to hold off. If you're stable enough or sound of mind enough to do that, you're also, let's say, sound of mind enough to be snapped out of it by anything. Anything. It's just, it fucking stinks. And of course, for the people who are saying, boy, I want to talk about the fact that he blew up this AT&T building where they may have had Dominion machines to examine. And as I said, they also have this other company, SandGuard, that had these servers that hold and process cell phone data, which a couple of people who have been listening to me have reiterated, yeah, that's NSA Center, where they track shit like that. In order to throw those people off, let's just go with the story of, oh, his neighbor says, or his mom says his dad used to work for AT&T, and he just didn't like AT&T. So there it is with a nice, neat little bow. Here's this guy. This is what he did. Except that even his actions fit into this 4-stage model that this ex-KGB propagandist laid out in this 1984 interview. The shit is just crazy. And with the way our country is right now, we are in, I mean, we really are in crisis, though I suppose some could argue we're in destabilization or destabilization and crisis. So when does it end? Well, it has to end sometime in January, likely. Sometime between January 6th and the end of January. And then what happens after that? Because once these kinds of things flip, once you get into that, you know, he didn't talk about this extensively, and there's another interview with him which I should probably watch. But once you get into that indefinite normalization period in which you are told now life is back to normal, and a good example of this is how, again, in leftist areas like where I live, the majority of schools are closed down, right? And I remember there was even a couple of times where my 10-year-old asked her teacher, so when are we going to be coming back to school? Didn't know that I was listening, whatever. And the teacher, well, I don't know. It's just really hard to say. Yet it's funny that as soon as the election is over, that Milwaukee Public Schools sent out a thing saying, well, we're really interested in returning to in-person learning. We'd like to know how you feel about that. The closer and closer we get to inauguration day, the closer our schools and other schools I've been observing, and now the narrative on CNN, NBC, etc., the more they're talking about, oh, it's really important that kids get back to regular school. I remember that Laura Ingraham did a segment about this a while ago, months ago. Nobody else touched the subject, but now all of a sudden these people sound like they're kind of doing the same segment that she did. Just meaning, now all of a sudden the left is starting to see how important it might be for kids to go back to school and have in-person experiences versus having to sit at home on a computer. In other words, forcing that period of normalization. Now, when they go back to school, I'll tell you what Milwaukee's doing. I'm sure a lot of these other not all of them, but a lot of these other ones are doing the same crazy shit. I bet you New York schools and other East Coast, right? They're doing this. They want to put dividers between desks, whatever fucking dividers. Kids will have to wear masks all day, that's for sure. They want to put dividers between desks. In her classroom, they're like in fours. Like I think there's like 30 kids, so 8 to 9 groups of fours, somewhere around 28 kids, right? They want to have a sanitation station in every classroom, which is ridiculous because I've been a parent volunteer in a class before, and there's always been tissue and sanitizer on the teacher's desk, but now they're going to officially call them sanitation stations. Plus, they'll put one in every hallway. So, okay, great. You encourage kids to wash hands and put sanitizer. So it's the same fucking thing. Having them wearing masks, having them with these fucking cubicles. So I want to know, what are they going to do at recess? Are they going to start telling kids, well, yeah, you can go outside, play, or if it's like where I live, it gets cold. Sometimes they have to do inside recess. So yeah, you can do inside recess in the gym, but we can't do anything while we're touching or where we're too close to each other. So they're going to say we're back to normal, yet they're going to be putting kids back, especially, and even worse with elementary school kids who are going to be more prone to just listening and not realizing how fucked up this is. They're going to be putting them back into a system where they're treating them like that. So the period of normalization. It's exactly how Brezhnev, the fuck is his name? Let me get his name right. I like Russian names. They just take a little practice to say correctly. Yuri Bezmenov. Exactly what Yuri Bezmenov said in his 4-stage model for destroying and overthrowing a nation. And that will be their period of normalization. Yeah, it doesn't sound pleasant. In fact, I'm at the point this year where I don't think I'm going to send my daughter back because one of her teachers started teaching some critical race theory curriculum. And there was supposed to be a school board meeting about this. And at the last, on Zoom, of course, not in person, and at the last minute, it just got canceled with no explanation. And we're told that we're going to have that later. So we'll see how that goes. But I've been watching them around my area in southeastern Wisconsin, and there have been several other schools that have had school board meetings saying, hey, we don't really appreciate this, teaching our kids this shit and teaching them that this country sucks and that they're part of the oppressive regime. What is this? And these school boards are not being very receptive. So if that's what I'm going to have to, that's going to be my choice, sending her back to school where she's going to get education that I'm going to have to correct daily. Plus, she's not going to get any real human interaction. She's going to be, get with the teachers, like tell the kids, okay, now if somebody doesn't stay 6 feet away from you, you go ahead and tattle on them. I mean, is that what they're going to do? I remember when that Columbine school shooting happened, right? I was already out of school by then, but I remember when that happened. And I know a lot of schools decided that, they got on the I'm scared of everything bug, and they wanted to put checkpoints going into the school, metal detectors, have security guards. And I remember thinking, this shit could have happened when I was in high school. It could have. It would have been fucking tragic, but it could have happened. And it could have happened many times in many schools. But the last thing I would have wanted when I was a kid, it would have changed my entire outlook on life if I would have went to school every day and there were always guards, security guards, cops there every day. If there was always a metal detector, I mean, all that would do is redirect my energy to thinking that something bad was eventually bound to happen. And that if it didn't happen, it was only averted because it was difficult for people to work around the security. Not that not everybody's like that. the majority of people aren't like that. It creates that mindset. I didn't like that shit then. Thinking about this now, you think I want my kids to think that's normal life? You know, obviously you got to teach a child about fucking stranger danger, but outside of that kind of shit, I don't teach my kids to be afraid of everybody. I don't teach my kids to keep their head down and walk either. They say hi to people all the time. In fact, you'd be surprised how many adults, fucking regular adults, we walk past that won't say hi back to my kids. We're just taking a walk. Dude, the other day we were at Michael's, I think, the place where you get all the yarn and shit, because my daughter likes to knit or crochet. And we're getting some yarn, and we're standing 6 foot behind somebody who's in a mask, and the person in front of them is checking out from the checkout line. And this older lady, I don't know, she's maybe 60 or something, she looks back, looks at my daughter, looks down at her hand. She's carrying this big thing of yarn. And my daughter's being friendly. He's like, hey. The lady just keeps looking at her and then turns around, faces the other way. So I look at my daughter, and I look at this. I said, did she say hi back to you? She's like, no. Some people just don't have any social skills, and it's not your fault. So now my daughter, who thinks this is funny, she thinks it's funny that I did this, that this lady did this. She waits until she's leaving and tries to say bye to her again, and that didn't work. And I said, that's the problem, is that I think part of the problem is that people have masks on because of this COVID, and they think that just because they have masks on, nobody can see them. Like, I think this lady is trying to be like, oh, she didn't see me because I got my mask on. Like, she could pretend like, and why would you ignore a fucking kid anyways? It's like another time we had some lady in a line who had her little dog, little kickable, whatever the hell it was, and we're checking out at a small, like, corner store, and she tries to pet the dog, and this lady says, oh, no, the puppy's social distancing too. I looked at her, and fortunately I have my shades on and my mask, so she couldn't see what my face did. But I'm looking at her just thinking, I don't know whether to be mad at you because that's so fucked up for you to say something that dumb to my kid, or to feel sorry for you because obviously you drank a lot of the Kool-Aid. But fuck all that. Demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. And the other day we talked about different ways that Trump can retain office. I said there were 2 ways, and one is with the faithless electors on the 6th. And the other is I didn't understand how the military vote works. That's what martial law is. With martial law, they seize the servers of the states in question, and then the military oversees a revote. Well, what happened the other day with that budget, though? I'm sure a lot of people were feeling let down, just like I was, that he decided to sign that shit. I guess I understand why, but not really. But in that budget, that 5,000-page bill was also a provision that said that the president cannot use the Insurrection Act. So I don't know if he crossed that out before he signed it or not. I tried to find that out, and nobody seems to want to talk about that at all. But that seems like that would be very important. Because of all the things that are wrong with that bill, he can correct some of them going forward should he retain power. He can correct a lot of them going forward, which is how I could kind of forgive that. But then when I found out that he can't, remember that he had this provision in there, it says he can't use the Insurrection Act. Well, what the fuck would he sign that for? If anybody knows that, I'd like to know. So he's put, via his tweets, he's put a lot of stock in being DC in January 6th. Now today, oh, that's not today. That's another week. That's right. Yeah, he was in Georgia yesterday campaigning. So is the runoff election on the 5th or the 6th? But that's going to be the same day as the Electoral College vote. And talk about crisis. So, all right, that's all that I got. Don't forget this shit. Always tell other people about this. Don't let them think that this is, we can't let this fly. And as soon as I got this done and uploaded, I'm going to put a link in the description to the full interview with that guy. You should check that out. All right. Thanks.